If I had to describe Charlie Bolden in 3 words, it would be those same words that represent the values of the United States Marine Corps: honor, courage, and commitment. But if somebody gave me 3 more words, I'd add determination, leadership, and intelligence. Charlie grew up in Columbia, South Carolina. He applied for the U.S. Naval Academy, but he was turned down by his elected representatives. It was still a segregationist South. Yet he persisted, and with the support of President Johnson and Representative Bill Dawson, he entered the Naval Academy. He graduated in 1968 as president of his class. As an aviator, Charlie flew more than 100 combat missions into North and South Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. While serving as a test pilot, Charlie was selected as for the NASA Astronaut Corps. He is a veteran of 4 space flights, logging over 680 hours in space. He piloted the Columbia and the Discovery, and he commanded the space shuttle crew aboard both the space shuttles Atlantis and Discovery. He returned to the Marine Corps, leading Marines once again in harm's way as the Deputy Commanding General of the 1st Marine Expeditionary Force supporting Operation Desert Thunder. Promoted to Major General, he led U.S. Forces Japan and later the 3rd Marine Aircraft Wing. Now, by any standard, that might seem to be a pretty full career. But in 2009, President Obama appointed General Bolden to be the 12th Administrator of NASA, a position he held for 8 years. He was the first human being to have his voice broadcast on the surface of Mars. During his tenure, you may have heard Administrator Bolden on Interlochen Public Radio. Little shout out for Interlochen Public Radio. But he was encouraging students to take up science and math. You may have heard of his work improving NASA's international standing. And finally, you may have heard him talk about and advocate for our long-term objective of a human mission to Mars. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming a friend, a truly inspirational leader, and not just a great American, but a person who represents mankind's best aspirational goals and has lived them. The 12th Administrator of NASA, Major General Charles Bolden, Jr., United States Marine Corps.
How are you doing? Good. Now I have to see. It is working. Okay, I just wanted to make sure my mic was working also. This is actually your time tonight. I think they give us, I don't know, it's not forever, but we've got enough time. 2 rules before I start. Rule number 1, and this is going to really mess things up because they have this question and answer period scheduled for the end, but I generally don't do that. So my rule number 1 is you can ask questions anytime you want to. The only thing you ask, because they're trying to record everything, is when you ask your question, if you can just kind of throw your hand up, then Karen or somebody else, we've got 2 mics, and we'll get around and get a mic to you. So be patient, and then we'll get to your question. Rule number 2 is probably the most important rule. There are no dumb questions. If you have a question, I can guarantee there's at least one other person in the auditorium who wants to ask that question but doesn't have the courage to do it. During my 8 years almost 8 years as the NASA administrator, I became known as the dumb question asker because I hate acronyms, for one thing. And so when somebody gave me a brief and they talked in acronyms, I said, okay, time out. I don't know whether that means this or that, so kind of tell me what you're talking about. So no dumb questions, just kind of keep that in mind. As I mentioned, it's your time. I have some slides that I will go through, provided you all are slack in your question asking. If you're a really good audience that's just full of questions, I may not get past, well, I'll get past the first slide because I'll do that right now. So that may be the last one we go to. Who knows what that is? What? Oh, that's right. It's our planet. And, you know, Jerry Leninger down here is a guy who spent 5 months 5 months on the old Russian space station called Mir. Lived through a fire, all other kinds of stuff. And so he has a little bit different perspective of operating in space than, say, Greg and me. So we have, among the three of us, you have three different perspectives of life in space. Jerry, although he's probably the younger of the three of us, he is the most experienced in terms of bad things going wrong in your spacecraft. And also the only one of us to ever fly with the Russians on Mir. Greg flew both shuttle and actually spent time on the International Space Station taking crews up and work crews up more than anything else, and helped to install something called the alpha magnetic spectrometer. And I'm not gonna, who are the astrophysicists here in the audience? I know there are some, okay. You know what AMS is? You don't? Are you a student? You're a teacher? Give me a thumbs up that you're a student. Okay, all right. I will make a feeble endeavor to explain the alpha magnetic spectrometer. And it's gonna be, you guys know what AMS is. The folk from Atlas. You just didn't wanna, see, the general down here is going, okay, I know the answer to that question. Anybody knows the answer to that question, but I'm gonna let my driver, Charlie Bolden, answer this question for you. That's the way all of us smart guys do it. I really know what this is, but I'm gonna call on Greg to tell him. Correct me if I'm wrong. AMS, alpha magnetic spectrometer, it is a phenomenal instrument. It is an experiment in pure basic science, basic astrophysics. We're trying to, people believe that there are what we call antimatter particles, and we know that about 95, 98% of the universe is made up of dark energy and dark matter, stuff we have no clue, not a single clue about it, and we really want to know. There are some who theorize, one of them is a guy by the name of Professor Sam Ting, who I think is going to be a Nobel laureate, another Nobel Prize winner again for this particular experiment, if in the billions of data particles that he's gotten in this thing in the time that it's been there, he discovers or he's able to verify that there really are particles of antimatter, because that just changes our whole understanding of the universe, I think. Did I get that right? And the good thing about it is it's on the International Space Station, so it's outside of our magnetosphere, so everything can go through this thing. It's not protected, you know, by the atmosphere and the magnetosphere and all that other kind of stuff. So everything that's floating around out there in space will go through this AMS. So now you know all I know about it. All right. So that's our planet. It's an image taken from about 1.5 million kilometers away. For those of you like me who don't speak kilometers, that's about 1 million miles. And it's in a place where the sun's gravity, the moon's gravity, and Earth's gravity all come together and kind of sort of hang around. And so it's like you're under no gravitational influence. And the technical name for it is a Lagrange point. And so that's where it is. It's been there for a number of years. The camera that was used to take this picture is called EPIC. And the mission is to look at Earth's changing climate. So it gives us all kinds of measurements about the oceans, the cloud cover, and everything else. And so NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NASA, the National Science Foundation, everybody in the world is able to get data from the Discover spacecraft and everything. As a bonus, we got the little guy that keeps running through the image. Who knows what that is? That's our moon. So you're seeing, every time it zips around, we're looking at an Earth month. So it's 28 days to go around. This is, since you don't have any questions, you can tell I'm now becoming the professor and I'm asking the questions. And that's kind of the way it goes. If you don't ask, I do. So what's unique about that view that you're getting of the moon? No, the backside. You gotta, and that's not bad, okay? But it's not the dark side of the moon, because the moon gets lit all around, but it turns at 28, you know, it rotates on its axis once every 28 days. So we always see the face of what we call the face of the moon. And so it's actually the backside. Anybody ever been back there? I mean, Apollo astronauts saw it, but anybody ever land back there? The Chinese, a few weeks ago. So humans have landed on the backside of the moon. Is that important? Yes, it is. Why is it important? What are we looking for? What do we look for everywhere we go? Water. Why? We hope. It doesn't guarantee. Okay, I don't want to get you excited. It doesn't guarantee that we're going to find life, but that's a pretty good idea. We always say follow the water. We now know there's lots of water on Mars. We even believe today that there's an abundance of subterranean water. So we really want to get there so we can start drilling and doing all other kinds of stuff. Why do we need to send humans instead of, why can't we just, we've been sending robots for 50 years now. Why not just keep doing that? Anybody think that's a good idea? How many of you would vote to keep sending robots? Forget about sending humans. 2, 3. Okay, can you give this lady a mic right here? Hey, I told you there are no dumb questions. There are also no dumb answers. So I want you to defend yourself. All right, this is right here, right in the middle. And then do me a favor, raise your hand, please, or stand up. That'll make it easy for them. So would you give us your name, your affiliation? You don't have to give us your date of birth, but then tell us why you think it's better. Why do you think it's better to send robots?
I think robots do
What's
a
your
pretty
name?
good job. I'm Amy.
Amy, okay. From here?
Yeah,
Okay.
live in Old Mission, actually.
Okay.
I just feel like the robots are doing a pretty good job of collecting data and information, and
Okay.
I guess my real question
Yes.
to you tonight is...
See, that's a good
how
way
do
to
you-
get the mic. You're really sharp. I like that.
What do you think about the Space Force?
Oh. Oh. Okay, let me give you my stock answer on that, okay? I'm not going to lie to you. I do have an opinion. I am not going to give you my opinion, and the reason is although I'm no longer with NASA, my last job was the NASA administrator. And if I were standing here as the NASA administrator, it would be totally inappropriate for me as the head of the U.S. Civil Space Program to give an opinion about something in the national security space arena, because that's not my business. So I'm gonna fall back on my stock answer of saying it's not my business. Yeah. But we've talked about this everywhere. So I would, if you have an opinion, or if you don't have an opinion, I'll give you a hint. Always, I tell people all the time, why? Okay, if you don't remember any word, any single word from my presentation, as members of the international forum here, International Affairs Forum, you should always ask yourselves, before you say a word or before you decide to do something, why? Kids ask us that all the time. The reason I asked you, and I appreciate your answer, why should we put humans at risk? Why should we put humans at risk to go to Mars? When we've been getting 50 years of really good data now, we can tell you all kinds of stuff about Mars. We can tell you that we think there's life there, or there has been at one time. What are we unable to tell you? We cannot confirm that there's life on Mars, and the only way we have to do it, we can do it 2 ways. We can send something there robotically and bring a sample back, and that'll give us an idea, or we can send humans and let them search around. All my science friends, my planetary science friends, tell me that, Curiosity has been roaming around Mars since 2014. So it's been there for 5 years now. And they say if we had Jerry Linenger roaming around the Martian planet, along with Box here, they would have mapped and sampled almost the entire planet in 5 years. So that's the advantage that sending humans give you. In the Apollo program, we went through all the way to Apollo 17, and we sent Harrison Schmitt, a geologist, the first real scientist to go to the surface of the moon. And Harrison Schmitt knew what he was looking for. All the other astronauts had gone, and they picked up rocks that they were told to get. And Harrison Schmitt looked around, and he says, I saw a lot of rocks I didn't recognize. Those were the ones I put in my bag, because I didn't have a clue what they were, but I wanted to bring them back. So that's why I believe we need to send humans to Mars, and that's why I've become a big advocate of it anyway. But that's our planet, and it's really important that the Chinese finally landed, an instrument on the back side of the moon, because we'll learn a lot more about whether or not there's really polar ice and all this other kind of stuff, and whether there's water to be found on the moon, not because we think there's life there, but just because we want to make fuel. We want to be able to take water, extract the oxygen from it, extract the hydrogen from it, and essentially make fuel, make rocket fuel. So that's one of the reasons we do it. Who knows where that is? And I'll talk a little bit shorter, quicker. Where is that? Just yell it out. I've heard all kinds of things. What general area of the world? The Middle East. That's what's important. Okay? Everybody, I do this with kids. I was over in Jordan and UAE, and I said, what is that? They said, it's Egypt. And I'm sitting in Jordan, and I'm going, what about right here? What's that? And they said, oh, all we recognized was Egypt. I said, yeah, there's a good reason. There are no borders. There are no boundaries. I come from the continent of Africa, somewhere in the long line of my ancestors. I can go back a lot of grandmothers ago, and there's a 16-year-old slave girl sold at auction in Charleston, South Carolina, that had 6 boys, and I am the direct descendant of one of those 6 boys. I wanted to know where she came from in Africa, so before I flew my first flight, I spent a lot of time studying African geography, so I would know all the countries of West Africa, and I remembered how they were shaped and all that kind of stuff. Now, you got to remember, I'm 39 years old when I did this, and I thought I was going to see these lines, down there. When I got, oh, you laugh. And about 15 minutes into flight, you launch from the Kennedy Space Center, and you're going 17,500 miles an hour in about 15 minutes. I mean, you have crossed the Atlantic, and you're zipping down over Africa. And I looked, and I didn't recognize it at first because I just thought it was this big continent. I thought it was a big island. And then I recognized the fact that, no, that's not an island. That's a big butt continent. That's Africa. And then I started to weep because I couldn't tell Morocco from Nigeria, from West Africa. So all my studying of African geography had gone for naught because there are no borders and boundaries. And those that, that we make on a map, human beings created. And sometimes we don't do too well with that. I mean, our history of making boundaries between different things is not real good. So that was a lesson I learned, that we create the borders and boundaries. Since we did that, we can undo it. We can start to recognize people as being participants or citizens of the planet. It's important to recognize your country and your community. Greg and Jerry will tell you, they just beamed when they flew over Michigan. Jerry says, he was telling some kids this morning, the Russians even got to the point when he was on muted, they would call out as they were going over Michigan, hey, Jerry, Michigan, so everybody liked it. And they could show the hand and all that stuff. It is good for us to be proud of the state, the city, the community, the country from which we come, but we cannot forget that we are all inhabitants of Spaceship Earth. And if we forget that, we're in deep trouble. Because if you look in this, some of you can see the thin blue line, or you can imagine you see it, the thin blue line between the blackness of space and daylight and our Earth. That's our atmosphere. And only about 10,000 feet of that is useful to us. Because you get above much of that, and the oxygen is just too rare. We can't breathe without supplemental oxygen and stuff, and we die. So the lesson is not that Earth is fragile. We always use the term Earth is fragile. We are very fragile. And either we take care of this planet on which we live, or we're done. There's one ocean. Earth is a big planet, sort of, and it's about 75% water. And that water consumes everything. And there are these little bodies of land, we call them continents, that stick up in that one ocean. And then we give the sections of oceans different names just because we like to name stuff. I don't know. But we live on one ocean, one atmosphere, and what we do in one part of it eventually will affect all of us. So that's the lesson that I want to share with you. There's a big deal today. We just finished Women's History Month. I look through the audience. I'm very proud to say that women, you are very adequately represented. In fact, you may dominate in a science forum. I am not surprised. to be quite honest, because around the world today, women are beginning to dominate in the area of science and sometimes in engineering. When I go to UAE or Jordan, about 51% of the graduates from colleges and universities in engineering are women. The United Arab Emirates has a mission called the Emirati Mars mission. They're preparing to fly next year to Mars. 90% of the science team is Emirati women because it was really important to have native Emiratis and not people from other countries actually run the mission, and they just can't find men, Emirati men who have studied and have interest in science, so women are just stepping up, and that's the story around the world. My daughter's medical school class was over 50% women some time ago, so thank you for coming out, women. If I can get this to work, I'll let you see what NASA is. So that's kind of a look at what's happening in your space agency. For the younger, all of you are young, but for the very younger girls and women in here, one of the things I hope you noticed was they're not all astronauts. They're not all engineers. They are everything. What you saw in those images were attorneys, doctors, nurses, accountants, nutritionists, you name it. Every one of the thousands of occupations that made it possible for the three of us to go to space was represented in that very short clip. And that's really important. If you want to be a part of the space program, you don't have to be an astronaut. If you want to be an astronaut, you can. I never dreamed of being an astronaut until I became one. So, you know, anything can happen. This is our home off the planet today. As I said, you know, Jerry nor I lived there, but Box did. So he for a little while anyway. But it's a phenomenal place. Today, an astronaut that goes to the International Space Station lives there typically 6 months at a time. So when I flew, mine was a camping trip. My long mission was 9 days. You can tough that out. I mean, you can go and, you know, you can fake it, sort of. You can't fake 6 months. When Jerry went to Mir, you can't fake 5 months. You really gotta know your stuff, and you gotta be prepared for all kinds of things going wrong, and he can tell you about that. But it's really tough to live and work in space, but that's home now. That's our home off the planet. We've been there for the last 18 years without interruption. How many of the young people in here are 18 or younger? We had a whole auditorium. Okay, they have never, everybody, look around, people like me, everybody whose hand is up right now, they have never taken a breath in their lives, not a single breath, when human beings were not occupying this thing. And to tell you how I believe, I think several of us believe, this is the greatest model for the way that humanity can work together that we have today. It's sort of a UN in space. And in that 18 years, even when we've had bad things going on, battles between the US and Russia or the US and somebody else, two nations that have always been represented here, even when we went down to 2 crew members, have been the United States and Russia. So when you're working on a common mission with a common goal, it's amazing what you can get done. But that's home today. It has a limited lifetime. I mean, we're probably going to have to move out of this in 2024, 2028. What some of us are trying to promote now is the development of smaller, commercially available, privately owned space modules or space stations. One of the things that Greg did for about 5 years was run an organization called the Center for Advanced Science in Space, CASIS, that was a contractor to NASA to try to find businesses that could use the microgravity environment of space to make money. Pharmaceuticals, materials processing, life support, biomedical research, you name it. We do everything on station today, from basic, fundamental, looking at fire and how it behaves, all the way up through gene editing and gene sequencing and the like. So it is the U.S. segment is called the U.S. National Laboratory, enacted by Congress. So that belongs to you, the taxpayer, and we're really trying to get your money's worth out of it. A normal astronaut today will work anywhere from 200 to 300 experiments over the course of a 6-month mission in space. So this is a little bit of what goes on here. An Italian fighter pilot, F-16s, now training with the Chinese to fly on Shenzhou and maybe go to the Chinese space station. So that's a little bit about what goes on station today. We've kind of changed things. A lot of people, one of the banes of my existence as the NASA administrator for my 8 years in the Obama administration was everywhere I went, I had to listen to people tell me how we had ruined human spaceflight. We had taken America out of human spaceflight. It was really sad that America wasn't flying astronauts anymore. And all I could do was shake my head, because frequently that was said in Congress, where they were writing a check, and knew that we were still flying on station. But we went through a period of transition where we decided that, if we're really going to explore, if we're going to do like I want to do, if we're going to send humans back to the moon and on to Mars, we really need to get out of the low Earth orbit business. NASA does. And we need to let American industry and entrepreneurs and people who really know how to do it now, let them do it. And let them, if they can, let them make it a profitable commercial business. Greg spent, like I said, 5 years trying to make that possible, trying to give companies and entrepreneurs an opportunity to spend some time on the International Space Station to see what it's like, see what advantages it has, so that they can then move off to private platforms. And we now have some private US companies who are actually building platforms that are going to be separate from the International Space Station. Excuse me. And you may find somebody who goes to an individual module, all they do is pharmaceuticals research. And they may take material there, leave it for 4 or 5 months, come back and pick it up, and all the work is done. And doing things like protein crystal growth or different experiments like that. So we had to find another way to get things and people to space, and we, like I said, we turned to American industry. So among the first, This is now Northrop Grumman, a big aerospace company, but it started out as a very small company called Orbital Sciences. Later, they merged with another company and became Orbital ATK, and last year they were actually bought by Northrop Grumman. But the module is called Cygnus. It's a cargo module that we send from Wallops Island in Maryland, the eastern shore of Maryland, to the International Space Station about 3 or 4 times a year, and it carries cargo. When it comes back, it burns up on reentry, so we use it to bring trash and stuff like that back. Although what Northrop Grumman is looking at now is taking some Cygnus modules. They've already been working with the Italians who produce it for them to human rate it so that they can finish a cargo delivery, go off and join it with another module, and it becomes sort of a mini space station. So companies are looking at those kinds of things. Here was the first module that actually went to the International Space Station, built by a commercial company, SpaceX. This is the Dragon. They recently flew the Crew Dragon to the International Space Station autonomously. It docked on its own. It stayed there for a week. We made sure that everything looked right, and so far it looks pretty good. So the next time the Crew Dragon flies, it should have a NASA crew on board, and it'll be the last flight in the certification, and then they'll be making money. So they'll be flying people to the International Space Station, to Earth orbit for other kinds of things. Here's one of our reliable partners, believe it or not. This is what we took a lot of heat for, sending astronauts to the International Space Station on Soyuz. This saved us when we lost Columbia on February 1st, 2003. The US did not have a backup. That's one of the reasons that we battle with Congress to get 2 providers for commercial crew, was because accidents happen in our business. And you don't want to have an accident put you in the situation we're in right now, where our only way to get to space is with the Russians. They're okay. Don't get me wrong. They're a really good partner. We just should not be dependent on the Russians to get our crews to the International Space Station. But that's the way we do today. We started it after the Columbia accident, so the space station crews, 3 at a time, went on Soyuz, and the construction crews went 7 at a time in the shuttle until we finished the construction of the space station in 2010. And then once that was done, the next year, we followed what direction we had from the Congress and others, and we retired the shuttle in July of 2011. So it's been since then that we just have not had an organic capability of getting our crews to space. This is from one of our partners, the Japanese. It's called the Japanese HTV. It is the largest cargo module that we have. I mean, it's massive. So it can carry lots of tons of cargo to the International Space Station. It can also carry outsized cargo like big batteries and things that we can't get in some of the other cargo modules. And then one that you'll see flying in a year or two, this is from a company called Sierra Nevada in Colorado. It's called the Dream Chaser. I love it because I'm a pilot, and it's a winged vehicle, and we can come back and land on a runway, which we can't do with any of the modules. The modules either go to the desert, and they kind of land with parachutes and stuff, or they land in the ocean. If we ever have a real emergency with a crew member, which we have not had in the 50 years that we've been flying humans in space, but if we ever had a real emergency where we had to get a crew member back to Earth quickly, and we can do it in about 2 hours, from the time that we know we have an emergency, if there's a landing site that's in the range of the space station or thing, we can get them back to the ground in 2 hours. You'd love to get them to a runway. And the Dream Chaser will allow us to do that if we have that flying. So it's like a miniature shuttle. Not long ago, a couple of months ago, for the first time, we flew a rocket ship or a rocket plane, the Virgin Galactic Spaceship 2. And these are actually, I didn't get the video to work, but these are actually images of Spaceship 2 after it was released from its carrier aircraft, the White Knight, and then lit its rocket and went up just to the edge of space, and then kind of rolled over and came back down in what we call suborbital spaceflight. So it's like Alan Shepard did, where you just go into space, and then ballistically you go over and come back down. Gives you about 20 minutes of time in microgravity, which is plenty of time to do a lot of the rudimentary experiments that we want to do before we spend a lot of money to develop something that we're going to put on the International Space Station for a long period of time. So it's awesome. Their second flight in less than a month carried Beth Moses. Beth Moses, you don't know, you've never heard of, probably. If you follow it, you've heard of her now. But Beth Moses was a former EVA spacewalk engineer from the Johnson Space Center who went with her husband, Mike Moses, who used to help us run the space shuttle program down in Florida. And Beth is there to begin training astronauts that are going to fly on Spaceship Two. And they decided that if she's going to teach astronauts, she probably ought to know what she's talking about, or to have some idea of what it's like to fly in space. So Beth became the first civilian, non-trained astronaut, non-anything, to just ride in the back, unstrap, and go giddy. And Beth did an incredible job. And so she's now, she's on the circuit now. So talking about what it's like to be in space. But that's Spaceship Two. And they're gonna, my guess is they will fly their first paying customers before this year is out. So, you know, Greg and I were talking yesterday morning, I think, about people say, how soon are we going to go to Mars? Or how soon are we going to put humans back on the surface of the moon? It is going to be much sooner than you think, because we're having things that are breaking that we needed to have. When I say breaking, we're having things happen good that we need to have happen. So we're getting perilously close. This is a picture of the SpaceX Crew Dragon as it approached the International Space Station on the left. First time that a commercially built, and I have to be, you have to understand, NASA never built a spaceship. So for those of us who used to believe that only NASA could build spacecraft to take humans to space, we never did that. It was always Rockwell or Boeing or somebody that built it under contract for us, and then it became ours and we operated it. That was what cost money. It cost us $2 billion a year. Oh yeah, when you get questions, just yell out. I'm sitting up here waiting for a question. All right, question back there. Yes?
I have a bunch of questions.
Give your name. Stand up so people can see you.
Megan, so I have a bunch of questions, but one would have to do with the research that's done on the space station. Is there a journal that's published in yearly so that people have access to that information?
There are gazillions of journals.
It's spread out across the board? It's not just like one NASA public journal?
One way to do it, and I'm going to go to, does CASES put together an index of experiments that we've run?
We have a journal.
Okay. Is it called CASES?
Yeah, it points to science that NASA does as well.
Okay.
But it's not comprehensive.
You didn't hear that answer. He said it's not comprehensive, but CASES, the center that does stuff, he's not satisfied with it yet, but they kind of put things together that point to the experiments. My recommendation to you would be to go to the NASA website, www.nasa.gov, and just kind of in the search box put in ISS research, and they refer to a number of articles and journals and stuff. What's your specific interest?
Well, I was just wondering that, which leads me into the next question, which if people are running private experiments on the space station, how do you know the difference, like who is paying for what? And then if there are private companies running experiments next to NASA or International Space Station experiments, what precautions, like is security an issue? And then with security, I have a bunch of questions, so that's kind of a bigger question.
Can you bring the mic over to Greg? Can you talk about how CASES, because they are, the question you're asking is a pretty technical question. So what I'm asking Greg to do is talk just a little bit about the process that CASES does to bring an experiment to NASA, to the safety review panel and everything else that says, okay, it's okay to fly it.
Okay, so NASA has many channels to get projects on the space station. One is through the government. One is through the CASES process. And there's also commercial channels. For example, NanoRacks, which technically is partnered with NASA or CASES and NASA, but they sort of have their own way of doing business. And so it doesn't matter what avenue you go through, there's a NASA safety process. Everybody has to go through the same process. So whether it's a proprietary experiment that not a lot of data is going to be open source like a government experiment, it can be kept secret or at least shielded from open source, but yet the experiment itself is going to be just as safe as any other experiment that NASA would put on the International Space Station. Does that answer your question?
Okay. Was there another question back there? I know you got plenty more, but we'll come back to you.
Okay, this is his gig. This is not mine, so I'm just saying.
Go ahead. Yes. Whoever has, oh, you got the mic. So go. No, if you got it. You probably got to punch
bring
in the
it
back.
up to him.
Oh, good.
You keep saying microgravity instead of saying zero gravity, and it's been in a couple of presentations. And it made me wonder if the International Space Station, and we're not going far enough from Earth for you not to say zero gravity.
Well,
and then
yeah.
that made me wonder if that means that eventually the International Space Station will crash to the Earth.
Well, that's a packed question. Let me try to answer. Zero gravity is kind of hard to get, and it's not really distance from the Earth as much as it is speed that gives us microgravity. So if I want to be weightless, if I want to go into microgravity, I develop enough speed that creates this force that you learned about. Are you still a student? Okay, then you probably learned about this force called centrifugal force. There's another little one called centripetal force, but we don't give it much credence. I mean, that's not a good word. It doesn't add a lot. But centrifugal force really battles against gravity. And so human beings are constantly being tugged by gravity to fall back to Earth, just like the spacecraft is. But centrifugal force is kind of marrying it up and meeting it up. The magic number for us is 17,500 miles an hour. You go much less than that, say 17.2, you're coming back to Earth. Because gravity is going to overcome centrifugal force, and it's going to win out, and it's going to bring it. That's the way we come back to Earth. We turn ourselves around backwards, slow down by about 300 miles an hour, and then gravity gradually, over an hour, pulls you back to Earth. It takes us 8.5 minutes to get to space because we're just powering. To go to the moon, 20,000 miles an hour or so, I think. I'm looking down here for the experts. In the ballpark. Yeah. But you get going fast enough that you overcome Earth's gravity, and then your speed and momentum keeps you headed toward the moon until, like Jerry said, the moon's gravity, as you get closer to it and farther from Earth, the moon's gravity grabs you and brings you in. So, and we use the term microgravity because we are never really, truly in zero G. We get perilously close. It's like we talk about a vacuum, the vacuum of space. Even space is not a true vacuum because there are molecules out there, but they're like feet or miles apart or whatever it is. So we try to be precise, and we talk about microgravity and near vacuum or stuff like that. Okay.
Charlie, can I do a dummy?
Sure.
Stand up, please. Yeah. Visual. So I'm going, I got to get off of Earth. Earth's pulling me back, right? Gravity's yanking me. And I got to go really fast. When I go 17,500, it yanks me back in my speed, and we're equal. If I want to go to the moon, is it 25,000, I think?
Something like that.
I got to all of a sudden fire those engines, and I got to get away from gravity. And it's yanking me back. And I'm trying to get to that moon. What's the moon doing? It's pulling me, but it's not as massive, is it? So I got to get about 2/3 of the way, and I almost run out of speed. If you watch me going, I'm going like this.
That's pretty good. Hey, that's all right. That's pretty. Okay, we got the microgravity, okay, what's your name?
Hello, my name is Mason.
Mason?
Yeah.
Good.
Okay.
Are you a PhD?
No.
Okay, not yet?
Okay, so when we landed on Mars and stuff and we're done with that, where do you think we'd go next?
Where do we go next after?
Mars.
Oh, after Mars. You're like my granddaughters. They want to. Why do we stop at Mars? We stop at Mars. We don't stop at Mars. We haven't gotten there yet. We're trying to get there. But after Mars, where people want to go, and it really depends on you. And I'm serious about this. We don't have the technical prowess. We're looking for nuclear power or ion, what's Franklin's, what's Vasimer? It's, the Vasimer. Yeah, magnetic, spitting ions out the back of something. We need a kind of propulsion that will, really get us going fast. It depends on the experts you talk to. Some people think that this quote unquote warp speed that you see in the science fiction movies, that it may be possible to attain that. That's what we need to do if we talk about going beyond Mars. We're going to send robots to Jupiter. And Jupiter has a giant moon called Europa. So we're working on a mission right now called the Europa Clipper. And it's going to go to Jupiter and kind of orbit Jupiter. Europa is a big water moon. And we honestly believe that that's probably a place where we're really going to find life, in the ocean of Europa. There's another big moon called Enceladus. And we're almost certain that we're going to find life there in the ocean because it regularly spews water up through little spouts in the ice. Both of them are covered by ice. But what we want to do soon is fly a swarm of what we call CubeSats, little bitty satellites, like some of you are learning to make here in the schools. But we'd like to fly a swarm of little CubeSats through the plume to collect some of the water, some of the stuff that's in there, and then either bring it back to Earth or analyze it while it's out there to tell us whether there's real life in that. So we suspect. So propulsion is the limiting factor on getting farther than Mars today. Mars is 8 months away. That's a long time for human beings just to be flying to go somewhere. So we've got to do better than that. There's an engine called VASMR that's in development. It's an ion propulsion engine that conceivably could do it. Franklin Chang Diaz, with whom I flew twice, believes he can get us there in 39 days. That's pretty impressive if that really happens. So, yeah, question up there. Yes, go ahead. If you got a mic, ask the question. You got it.
My name is Debbie. I wanted to revisit the experimentation subject and ask why is there not a more defined format and requirement to document these experiments similar to medical science, which we use JAMA and other publications to document very specifically the experiments?
You know, in fairness, I actually think there is. I just can't tell you. That's why I recommended that you go online to the NASA website and kind of communicate. I forget who the chief scientist is today for the International Space Station, but she would be able to. It used to be Julie Robinson, and I think Julie's gone, but the chief scientist for the International Space Station program, or the NASA chief scientist, who's a guy named Jim Green, and they'll respond if you write to them and say, hey, what's going on here? Bolden couldn't explain it to me, so don't send him out to talk about science on the space station anymore. Yeah, say, fire that guy, okay? But I'm certain there is, because I know one of my complaints about experimentation, particularly that in which I participated, was I want to know what you found out. And are you a scientist? Oh, you sounded like it when you asked that question. But, you know, scientists always tell you, well, but I don't have enough data points. And so we need more data points before I can write a report. And I said, look, you got me, and you got maybe one other in the next 20 years. Take those 2 data points and start writing. So, okay. Okay, okay, all right, got it. Question back there, yes.
Hi, my name's Allie. I was just wondering, what's the reasoning behind studying like diseases, like the experiments with diseases in space? Like, what's the reasoning for that?
Why study the diseases, or why space?
Why space?
Because space, and we keep saying this, you take away the most powerful detractor from research on most things that have to do with molecules and atoms and stuff, which is gravity. Gravity screws things up. When you're trying to look at protein, for example, at the molecular level, gravity makes stuff just organize itself in a way that is not natural. So when we get into microgravity and we create a protein crystal, we grow, and I'm making this up, they're not that big, but they're, in relative terms, they are massive sized crystals that the lattice of the crystal itself, you know, the little lattice work in there is almost perfect because gravity has not caused it to be skewed, and we can slice it and dice it and look at it under an electron microscope. And for some diseases, if you see a protein crystal from a bad bug, and you can make a mirror image of it, that's one way we think you defeat a disease. So I'm out of my league here. I'll ask Dr. Jerry to, yeah. And today we're looking, we actually do some gene sequencing. The reason we do it is we just want to see, taking gravity away, does it make it easier for us to go in and do genomic studies and the like? And the answer so far is yes. So that's the primary reason we do it on space station. Some of them, and you know, the reason you do experiments, you know what experiment means? We don't know. And you know what the answer in a lot of experiments is? I was wrong. And so the reason we do experiments, I mentioned the fact that we fly suborbital spaceflight, is because some things are so dramatic in the theory that people are hypothesizing that if it isn't going to work, you'd like to know it as soon as you can, because it's really expensive to fly it on orbit. And so if I've got this wild and crazy idea, I want to know that it's a wild and crazy idea. So I put it on something that's doing a suborbital flight for 20 minutes, cost me 200 grand, and I'm done. If it turns out to be good, okay, I'm willing to put in $500,000 or $1 million or whatever it is to put it into full-fledged tests. Things like salmonella, the Michael J. Fox Foundation teams with NASA on the International Space Station looking for remedies for Parkinson's. And all these things we're finding that when you take gravity away, you take gravity out of the equation, it is amazing what we learn about the human body. Osteoporosis used to baffle us until we started sending astronauts to space. You know, Jerry, Greg, and I mean, we got a condition that looked like osteoporosis in a matter of days, because without the stress and strain of walking around down here, you know, the human body said, what's this calcium stuff? I don't need that. So it started leaching it out of your bones, and your bones got weak. That's what people talk about when they talk about bone loss. You know, you're not going to disintegrate, but the strength in your bones, your bone mass can really deteriorate. That's why I said the advantage of having the incredible exercise apparatus that we have today, the diet that we have today that we work up with the dietitians and the flight surgeons and everybody, and then medication on board if you need it, like a calcium supplement or something like that, really helps astronauts to get back. And it's all to make life better here on the planet. If we're not doing that, then we don't want to waste our time on the International Space Station actually working on it. It's not just to get astronauts to Mars, it's to make life better here on the planet. There was a question right there. Right here. Right here? Okay, and then back there.
Hi, I'm Jamie Rich. I'm a space tweep, space hipster, space camper.
Yeah.
So I'd like to bring this back to the moon, if I may.
Yeah.
Recently, NASA was tasked with putting boots on the moon by 2024. So my question is, can you characterize that mission in that, would it be an Orion SLS mission? Would it be an Orion commercial crew? Would it be strictly commercial crew?
Yeah.
Because that just seems like a very short amount of time for us to suddenly do that.
Really quick answer to your question, no. I cannot characterize what it will be because we don't know. And another myth that I have to, and I'm being defensive here, so I think you will understand that, because I ran the space agency for 8 years and took a lot of slings and arrows. The Obama plan was the George W. Bush plan, was the Clinton plan, was the George H. Walker Bush plan. I mean, the plan goes all the way back to World War II. Wernher von Braun wrote the plan to send humans to Mars before he finished the Saturn V. So human beings have always, always, always been curious. That's in our DNA. And we have always picked Mars for some reason. Mars seemed to be the place, you know, it's in our solar system, it's reachable, takes a long time, but it's like Earth. Mars, Venus, Earth, take your pick. We know Venus is really hot and really toxic. And so, do we want to waste a lot of time trying to figure out how to live there? We know that Mars is really cold and barren, and it's got a pretty harsh radiation environment, but today we know, because of measurements with Curiosity and other spacecraft, the radiation environment at Mars may be doable. I believe we're going to live underground. I'm not sure what other people think, because we'll use the Martian soil as a shield, but I don't think it's, our big problem in going to Mars is how the heck do we get all this stuff safely on the surface, because Mars's atmosphere is too thick to be ignored. It'll burn up a spacecraft trying to come through, and it's too thin to be helpful. So it doesn't act as a decelerator the way that Earth's atmosphere does. I mean, you know, Earth is we're the Goldilocks, middle bear, just right atmosphere. Okay, enough of that. But the answer is, we're still trying to determine what is the best combination to get people to Mars. My desire and my hope is that we will decide that NASA should not be doing humans to Mars. It should be either an international partner that takes a NASA astronaut, or it should be a private entity that is perfectly capable of doing it. It's just hard, and send a NASA astronaut down. I think you should have I believe, because NASA ought to be putting the body down there first, but I think there are all kinds of possibilities. Now, going to Mars, that's different. I really do think that's going to be SLS and Orion or something else. You just don't, and we've done gazillion studies to say you need a really big vehicle and a module that can do it. Will there be something better down the line? Yes, there will. We hope. The reason we're not back on the moon today is because we stopped trying, to be blunt, quite honest. Okay, anymore? I show this real quick while somebody's got a question back there, I think, or right here. This is Shenzhou. We can't work with the Chinese in human spaceflight because of something called the Wolf Amendment. When I was the NASA administrator, President Obama sent me to China with a very small team. I took Bill Gerstenmaier, the head of human spaceflight, Peggy Whitson, who at the time was the chief of the astronaut office, and we went over and met with the Chinese and toured everything. They let us climb around inside Shenzhou and climb around inside Tiangong, which was at the time in development to become their first space station. Took us way out in the Gobi Desert and let us look at their launch complex and go through everything and talk to astronauts and do all other kind of stuff. We came back and our assessment was, you know, we can do this. This would be really easy to do like an Apollo Soyuz or a shuttle Mir. We've got the plans in place. We know how to take care of ourselves from a security standpoint, you know, and all this other kind of stuff, so we can make this happen. And I think President Obama wanted to do it. We could not get through one congressman by the name of Frank Wolf, who became a friend of mine, but he was the chairman of the Appropriations Committee in the House of Representatives, which means he wrote the check. So that was where I learned the president proposes and the Congress disposes. And so he put just one little phrase called the Wolf Amendment in the NASA 2011 budget that said, okay, you guys can get this money, but thou shalt not spend one dime collaborating with the Chinese on human spaceflight. And that law stands today. So we're working on it, but we should be flying with the Chinese. We should have them come into the International Space Station, or people like Samantha Cristoforetti will be going to China to train and fly because they're in the UN now inviting all comers to fly with the Chinese. And I think we'd rather wrestle with them coming to the International Space Station where we know what they're doing than off on their own where we have no clue. Question here.
Thank you, sir. Space junk. Do you know if
Space junk bed.
Correct. I know we have several thousand pieces of junk going around, and it seems like most of the articles that I've read or seen is dealing with a single capture of an old satellite or something, and it just doesn't seem fathomable to me that we're going to be able to bring and clean up the space that we have. Do you know of anything that's going on in the works?
There's a lot of stuff going on in the works. Successful to date, nothing. We now have a number of companies. Orbital ATK, Northrop Grumman now has actually a contract with Intelsat, and sometime in the next year or so, they're actually going to fly a mission that they were working both for DARPA and NASA, fly a robotic satellite up to a stranded Intelsat satellite, and they have a stinger, like a thing, like a jousting pole, and it's going to go right up into the back end of the nozzle of the cripple of the satellite that's, I think it's out of fuel. And so it will grab that satellite, dock with it, and it robotically will connect to the fuel cap and refuel it, make repairs, replace the battery, whatever it needs to be done, all robotically. We couldn't do this a couple of years ago. Today we think we can because of experiments that we've done on the International Space Station. Greg, did you take Dexter on one of your flights? Yeah, Dexter is a robot. It's a single arm on the exterior of the International Space Station that moves up and down the truss structure. And with Dexter, with a robotic arm, we've actually been able to clip wires, to twist wires together, to remove caps on refueling ports, to do things that people used to be able to do so that we don't have to put an astronaut outside to do that kind of stuff. So that's what, is that like 1 minute or 7? Oh, okay. So I got 15 more minutes for questions? Okay, till it ends. They're throwing me out. So now here come all the questions. Jack, do you want to come up here and we do like Q&A, or you want to just keep doing it this way? Okay, and you can ask questions to any of us. We'll take a mic up here, and Jerry and Greg can also answer, because we just want to get as many questions as we can. I'm coming back. Right back there. Yes. Name, if you can give us your name and whether you're a student or what.
My name is Vita Joy. I am a student at Central High School currently, and I had a question about the study of diseases in space. So on Earth, we have mutating diseases which have us get vaccines every year for a new strain of disease. Mm-hmm. So I was wondering if there have been any mutations in space that have to do with diseases because they act differently due to the gravity out there.
Did everybody hear? She was asking, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, have we seen mutations in viruses and the like that would enable us to tackle diseases that occur down here on Earth? And the answer is yes. Things that go through mutations, generally viruses that mutate or whatever it is, become virulent, it tends to happen much quicker in microgravity. A good example of one thing that, Jerry, I'll ask you if we understand this. The human immune system is something that is a myth, we don't fully understand what happens to it, but we know that when we go to space, initially the human immune system begins to go to, I say it goes to Bumbleland, it goes to sleep. So it really gets weaker and weaker and weaker. Before we started flying on the International Space Station for long periods of time, the assumption we made was, because the line was going that way, was that you'd get to a point where your immune system wouldn't function anymore. Ha ha! With long duration space flight, we found that it goes down, and then all of a sudden it recovers and it comes back up. In a few astronauts, we've actually seen hyperactive immune systems in the recovery where it comes back up and it kind of overshoots and then it steadies itself out. I haven't talked to a doctor yet who's been able to fully explain that, but that's the kind of stuff that being in microgravity allows you to tackle. So yes, things like Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, we already mentioned Parkinson's. There are a number of diseases. It just takes, what it takes is, it goes back to the question the young lady asked back here about publication. We have got to get some of these experimenters to write their results down and say, you know, being on the International Space Station is really good jujus. You know, you may not make a fortune, but man, we're making life better back on the planet. And we just don't have that story being told enough, because it's happening every single day now, and we just need to get the word out. Yeah, question here.
Hi, I'm Roger. And the nation of India the other day shot some stuff.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And now I've heard conflicting things. They said it didn't create debris that would endanger the ISS, but of course NASA has not felt that was appropriate, that they did that kind of, it sounded like without, you know, hey, we're going to be doing this today. Is that the case?
Well, I mean, the Indians say no, it did not pollute low Earth orbit where a station is, and the Air Force and NASA, who do the tracking, say yes, it did. And we generally can catalog down to about a hairpin sized thing, you know, depending on the tracking station. And so the Air Force today, out in Colorado Springs, I don't know, the catalog is in the tens of thousands. It's not in the thousands, but there's a lot of stuff. And they do what they call analysis that determines what its orbit is and everything, so we can make predictions of potential impact. And we're talking about, if we can't track a fleck of paint, but it's things like flecks of paint that do the most damage to the station, you know, hitting the solar arrays or a window or something like that. So we track all this debris that was created by the Indians, and it wasn't as bad as the Chinese, because when the Chinese did their ASAT test, they were actually on an orbit above station, so it had to come down through station's orbit. I think, I'm not sure where the Indian satellite was, but I think it was co-altitude with station, but it's causing some problems. And we'll have to move station periodically, but the Air Force makes predictions usually weeks in advance. Sometimes it's only hours in advance. It says these two spacecraft are going to get like maybe 25,000 meters of each other, so we need to move one. So anyway.
Can I invite Jerry Linenger, Dr. Jerry Linenger, and Greg Johnson to come to the stage so everyone can look at them? Jerry Linenger spent 2,200 orbits. He flew 110 round trips to the moon.
We're going to give you
back.
this one. You can keep that.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry, Jack.
Go ahead.
We're going to give you Jack's mic.
Yeah. And Greg Johnson, 31 days, 11 hours, and 50 minutes in space.
Yeah, question. Would you consider what we're doing now to be a space race, either in science or in military? Either way.
An opinion of one, mine. You know, like opinions are like butts. Everybody's got one. So you're getting I'm not going to show you my butt, but you're going to get my opinion. The race, there is a race. The race today is commercial, and the race is between really big guys and a lot of money. I'll ask Greg to agree or disagree. The guys we love, Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, I mean, that's a race because they've got the money to back up what they're trying to do. And it's fun for us to watch them because they're dragging the American public and the world along. I took it away, but they're helping us to do this thing up here, education and outreach. That may not be what they're trying to do, but man, they can get kids fired up. Yeah.
So
that's
Bill,
what
was the question?
Is there a race today, you know, between nations or stuff? And I said, I don't view it as such. Some people look for an enemy in order to do something. I don't.
You may not consider this part of your job then, but from a military standpoint, you see us in a space race.
Oh, without a question. But I thought you were talking about like human spaceflight stuff. Yeah. From a military standpoint, I don't know that, would you classify it as a race? Or it's a matter of who's trying to make sure you stay dominant?
I would argue it's a contested environment.
Yeah. You just want to make sure that they can't do any bad stuff to us, but they should know that if necessary, we could probably do some bad stuff to them. And then the bad part about it is we end up with like stuff like, if you're talking about kinetic weapons, you're talking about ending up like we ended up with the Indians and the Chinese, and then everybody loses because you take away this environment that you were trying to protect, you take it away because you create so much debris that nothing or no one can survive there. And you know, it's usually we're talking about geosynchronous orbit, 22,000 miles above Earth, but we're talking about anything from geo all the way down, and you just don't need to be using kinetic weapons in there. So it's negotiations and all that kind of stuff. Okay, there and then here. You got a mic? Okay, mic over here. Okay.
Hi, I'm Soren.
You got two guys over there too, so you can address it.
So I heard you talking about like how we might move out of like the ISS. Like, are there any plans in place like for a new space station?
Yes and no. The question was, are there plans in place for a new space station? This is called the Lunar Orbit Gateway, and this is one of the things that NASA and it's important. Okay, this is the International Affairs Forum, so I want you to think internationally. This is not the U.S., folks. We can't do this alone. This is an international, I mean, we talk about it a lot, but what makes it viable and what makes it so good is that this is industry, international partners, entrepreneurs, it's all comers. What NASA has done is put out a call that said, hey, anybody who thinks they can use the Lunar Orbit Gateway as a platform from which to send humans down to the surface of the moon, let us know. We'll pay you. So that's the way we're doing business today. We're not living in this, some of us are trying to, but we're trying to get out of this bubble where it was NASA against the world or the US against the world. The Lunar Orbit Gateway is an international project, and it will be the new kind of like a space station, but not intended to be like the space station of today. This will be, as the name implies, it'll be a place where astronauts come from low Earth orbit, either to go down to the surface of the moon or to prepare for the journey on to Mars. They may even, in the distant future, we may build telescopes on this. We may build a rocket ship using 3D printing and use a much smaller rocket ship to go on to Mars. And that's the reason I answered the question about, you know, SLS and Orion, one of these days will be obsolete because we'll be producing small rocket ships. You know, once you get in space, once you're away from the gravity well of Earth, you don't need a lot of power. Newton's law says, let me go and I will go forever until something stops me. And it's just a matter of how fast do you want to get there. So that's why I said for propulsion, in answering the question back there, we want something that's going to make us go really fast. But anyway,
Charlie, I'm afraid we're on to our last question.
Okay.
It's almost 7:15. I know, it's really frustrating.
I'll let
but
you
does
pick it,
somebody
'cause I'm
have
not
a
picking.
good overall question? You're going to guarantee it?
Okay, and I need a student, not an adult. Yeah.
It's a lottery.
Okay, right. Somebody's got a mic there. They're fighting over it.
Okay,
Why
so
don't you put your questions together, ask two in one.
okay, you were talking about the rocket/plane that can bring back an astronaut in 2 hours, but what if a medical emergency is more critical than that? Like first aid on a rocket, what's that like?
And then what was your question? You're gonna get 2 for 1.
I wanted to know what each of your favorite experiments were that you conducted in space.
Ah, okay, good. That'll be the closing question for yours, and I'm going to ask Dr. Leninger here to help me out. One of the things that every crew that goes to space does is every crew has a designated crew surgeon. Now, don't let the name fool you. What it means is that every crew has someone who's trained to do routine kind of emergency medical care. We can suture, we can repair a broken bone, we can replace a filling, we can do a lot of things. We can do a trach if somebody stops breathing. We've even rigged up ways that, you know, you can do whatever that thing's called.
Everyone always says you're a doctor, so you were the doctor on the crew. Yes, I was the doctor because they didn't have to train Greg to be the doctor. You know, doing blood samples on myself. I had a fighter pilot, a MiG fighter pilot, wanted to take my blood samples, and he's like this. And pretty soon I said, I'll take my own blood samples, never mind. So there is a physician up there, but we have remote medicine, and NASA's been a pioneer in that. So, you know, sonograms, things like that, they can send things down to the Earth, do diagnostic tests on the Earth, and then inform the astronauts on board, you know, what course of action they should take. And NASA has used that to remote places in Africa and everywhere else, using the same technology, telemedicine kind of stuff. And so that it's been a big spin-off for NASA.
Now, to answer the last question, your favorite experiment?
My favorite experiment, so we had the worst fire ever on an orbiting spacecraft, a real fire, you know, life and death, 14 minutes, blackout, everything else. After that was over, I did a flame propagation experiment. And so I know, you know, what this experiment is all about.
Replenishment.
Yeah, so that, I say this is relevant science we're doing here. So I'm inside a glove box, and you have a sample, and this answers a couple questions, actually. You have a sample there, high-speed cameras above it. We would start the wind tunnel up, and then start the flame, high-speed camera looking at the propagation of that flame. And you find out in space, for example, in the quick thing that Charlie showed there, a flame is not flame-shaped in space, it's spherical. Warm air doesn't rise, you don't get the flame shape, fresh oxygen doesn't move into it, and if you keep a candle, for example, perfectly still without any ventilators going, it'll just put the fire out because it'll eat up the oxygen in the boundary layer, no warm air rising, no fresh oxygen coming in, puts the flame out. International Space Station, lessons learned from that experiment and from my own experiments. First thing that happens in a fire, International Space Station, boom, ventilators shut off. And a flame could very well just put itself out. And so that flame propagation experiment, big time serious. You talked about robots and the human being, the scientist. You know, we can think, we can reason. And I had limited samples, 25 samples. I put the first one in there, high-speed camera, I light it, and immediately goes out. I say, okay, they want the wind tunnel to go at the next speed. I put it at the next speed, I see it immediately go out. If I'm a robot, I'm just gonna keep doing the same thing and burn 25 samples. Instead, I say, I'm a scientist. I don't like what's going on here. I don't care what they told me. I'm cranking this thing up to the halfway point right away, and the sample still goes out. Now I crank it up even higher. Now I've got pretty good airflow. Sample propagates. Now I'm able to use the next 22 samples I still have in very fine gradations and get very good data points. And that's a scientist and a human being in that loop and not a robot just burning one sample after another and getting no good scientific result.
Greg.
Wow, so now you know why we were really sad when Jerry Linenger left the astronaut office. I always joke there's two kinds of astronauts, the pilots and the smart ones. Oh, I'm just kidding. So, I'm just kidding. But so as a pilot, I wasn't really performing a lot of experiments. The alpha magnetic spectrometer, of course, is my favorite experiment of basic research that Charlie described. But interestingly enough, as we're, the unintended, the unknown unknowns is what the AMS brings us. Because as we're trying to study the radiation environment with astronauts in space, the AMS has collected over 100 billion cosmic particles. And so we better understand the radiation environment of low Earth orbit because of this experiment that was intended to study our universe, dark matter, dark energy, naturally occurring antimatter. So that's the value of basic research, is you can learn things that you didn't even know that you could learn. And now, like with mixing peanut butter with chocolate, we've got a Reese's cup here, and we take all of the information that we've got on the AMS, put it into the human research program, and better understand the radiation environment for long-duration spaceflight.
So I'm not going to give you my answer. What I'm going to do is we're going to show one final video as you all exit, and let me explain it to you because it goes really fast. I like it because it's got great music. So turn it up. But everybody talks about going to the moon and Mars and stuff and saying, yeah, but all you have is drawing board stuff. We don't. We're building hardware, and we have been building hardware for a number of years. We actually flew Orion, which is the crew module, on a test flight back in December of 2014. We wanted to see three things. Can we communicate with it? Can it talk back to us? And can it withstand the reentry pressures and temperature such that a human would survive reentry? And it passed all three with flying colors. So we know that Orion can do what we want it to do. So you'll actually see some footage from the test flight of Orion. When you see this module that's got fire on the outside, that's a picture as it's on a camera sitting in the pilot seat. So that's the way you would see the skin on your vehicle burning up so that you don't burn up. It's an ablative material that burns off so that it protects the spacecraft. We didn't do that on Shuttle. Shuttle had these tiles that just heated up, but we've gone back to the kind of material that we used to use back in the Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo days. So you'll see that. You'll see the construction of the huge fuel tanks for the SLS, and then you'll see testing of the engines, the solid rocket boosters, and I'll just let it run. So thank you all very much. You have been absolutely awesome, so enjoy.
Thank you.